I knew I was in hell when the man I had created looked down from his throne and ordered my name to be erased. The first thing I felt was cold marble under my knees, smooth as ice, and just as unforgiving. The second was the weight of silver chains around my wrists, bright and ceremonial, almost beautiful if they had not been holding me in front of an entire imperial court. Above me, a ceiling at least 50 feet high disappeared into painted shadows of angels, wolves, and crowned kings, while hundreds of nobles stared as if they had gathered for theater instead of judgment. My mouth was dry. My pulse was too loud. And on the black throne at the end of the hall sat Emperor Alexander Hale, the Alpha Emperor of the Northern Empire, the most dangerous man in the novel I had written with my own hands. He looked exactly as I had described him. Black hair falling like ink over pale skin, gold eyes colder than winter sunlight, a face so calm it made fear feel childish. Only this was not a screen. This was not a paragraph. This was real. The scent in the air was sharp with pine, frost, polished steel, and alpha authority, pressing against my lungs until every instinct in this unfamiliar Omega body screamed at me to lower my head. Then I heard a voice beside me whisper, "Caleb Whitmore, evil stepbrother of Lord Ryan Whitmore, accused of poisoning the imperial heir candidate." My blood went cold. Caleb Whitmore. I knew that name. I had invented that name during a week of bad coffee, unpaid bills, and desperate deadlines. Caleb was supposed to be a minor villain, a jealous stepbrother with pretty silver hair and a rotten heart, written only to make the real hero look innocent. In Chapter 12, Caleb was dragged before the Emperor, condemned for a crime he did not truly commit, and removed from the story before sunrise. I remembered writing the scene. I remembered thinking it was efficient, clean, dramatic. Now I was trapped inside it. A tremor ran through my fingers, and when I looked down, I saw them. Pale hands, elegant and thin, the hands of a noble Omega, not mine. On my left wrist, beneath the cuff of a torn white sleeve, black letters slowly surfaced across my skin. Like wet ink. Villain ending, execution at dawn. My breath caught. The words pulsed once, then faded, but the meaning remained like a hook behind my ribs. I lifted my head too quickly, and the hall reacted with a soft wave of disgust. Someone muttered that I still had no shame. Someone else laughed under their breath. Near the Emperor's right side stood Ryan Whitmore, golden-haired, blue-eyed, dressed in white, the perfect victim I had designed to be loved by everyone. He covered his mouth with one delicate hand, but his eyes were not frightened. They were watching me too closely, waiting. The Chancellor unrolled a parchment and announced that poison had been found in Ryan's wine. My stomach dropped because I knew this part. I knew every line. Caleb was supposed to panic, insult Ryan, and prove himself guilty in front of the court. The invisible pull of the scene tightened around my throat, urging my mouth open, trying to force the old dialogue out of me. My lips began to move against my will. Then Alexander leaned forward, and his golden gaze pinned me in place. "Do you deny it?" he asked. His voice was quiet, but the entire hall obeyed the silence that followed. I should have said the cruel line I had written. I should have played the villain and died on schedule. Instead, I swallowed the terror rising in my chest and stared at the Emperor I had created to be untouchable, unloved, and eternally alone. "Your Majesty," I said, my voice shaking but clear, "if I wanted Ryan dead, why would the poison be hidden in your cup?" The court went silent. Ryan stopped breathing, and for the first time since I opened my eyes in this nightmare, Emperor Alexander Hale looked at me not with disgust, but with interest. For one heartbeat, no one in the Imperial Hall moved, and in that impossible silence, I understood something terrifying. I had not saved myself yet. I had only stepped off the path I had written. Emperor Alexander Hale raised one gloved hand, and the Chancellor stopped reading at once. The nobles who had been so eager to watch me fall suddenly looked uncertain, as if the floor beneath their polished shoes had shifted by an inch. Alexander did not look at Ryan. He did not look at the guards. His golden eyes stayed on me, sharp enough to cut through every lie in the room. "Explain," he said. One word. No anger. No mercy. Just command. My throat tightened because the invisible pressure of the story pushed against me again, trying to drag my tongue toward the old lines. I was supposed to sneer. I was supposed to accuse Ryan of acting. I was supposed to make myself look cruel, foolish, and guilty. Instead, I forced my fingers to curl around the chain at my wrists and searched my memory like a man searching for a door in a burning house. Chapter 12. The Banquet. The white wine. The silver tray. The traitor was not Caleb. It was Duke Marlowe, a smiling old noble with a sapphire pin shaped like a hawk. He had used Ryan as a distraction, placed harmless bitter herbs in Ryan's glass, and hidden the real poison in the Emperor's cup because Alexander was the true target. I turned my head slowly, scanning the court until I saw the pin shining near the second row. Duke Marlowe was there, pale and stiff, his smile frozen. "The cup on the Emperor's table has not been touched," I said. "There is a false bottom beneath the stem. Break the base, and you will find a black glass capsule inside." A murmur rolled through the hall like wind before a storm. Ryan's perfect expression trembled for half a second before he lowered his lashes. Alexander finally looked away from me. He gave a small nod to the nearest guard. The man crossed the marble floor, lifted the untouched imperial cup from the high table, and placed it before the chancellor. Nobody breathed as the chancellor examined it. A tiny mechanism clicked. The bottom loosened. Something dark slipped into a white cloth. The court erupted in whispers. My knees almost gave out, not from relief, but from the sudden knowledge that I had just changed the story in front of everyone. Alexander stood. He was tall, more than 6 feet, dressed in black and silver, his presence so absolute that the entire hall seemed to shrink around him. The old fear in this Omega body reacted before my mind did, making my pulse jump and my eyes lower, but I forced myself to keep watching. He descended the steps, from the throne one at a time, each movement controlled, elegant, and dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with force. When he stopped in front of me, the scent of frost and pine surrounded me, colder than winter air coming off a mountain road. "Caleb Whitmore," he said, and hearing my borrowed name in his voice made my skin prickle. "How did you know?" The honest answer was impossible. "Because I wrote you. Because I wrote this room, this cup, this betrayal, and the loneliness hiding behind your crown. Because I thought your pain made a better story." My mouth opened, but the black ink on my wrist burned beneath my sleeve, warning me without sound. I could not tell him the truth. Not yet. So I gave him the only lie that was close enough to survive. Because everyone was looking at Ryan, I whispered, and a real traitor would aim for the person no one dared to protect. Something flickered in Alexander's eyes. Suspicion, yes, but also something more unsettling. Interest. Recognition. Behind him, Ryan's fingers tightened around his white sleeve. The chancellor began to ask whether I should be released, but Alexander cut him off with a glance. "No," he said. "He knows too much to be innocent, and too much to be left alone." My stomach sank. The chains were unlocked, but freedom did not come. Alexander turned back toward the throne, his black cloak sweeping over the marble like spilled night. "Place Lord Caleb in the moon tower beside my private study," he ordered. "From this moment on, he remains under my personal watch." The court gasped as if he had just handed me a crown instead of a cage. Ryan looked at me then, and for the first time, the sweet hero of my novel smiled without kindness. That was when I realized the story was not only changing, it was watching me change it. The moon tower was not a dungeon, which somehow made it feel more dangerous. It rose from the eastern side of the palace like a pale needle, wrapped in glass windows and white stone, with a view of the capital spread beneath it in glittering streets, red rooftops, and candlelit bridges. The room they placed me in had a bed large enough for 3 people, a fireplace glowing with blue, imperial flames, shelves of old books, and silk curtains that moved whenever the night wind slipped through the balcony doors. It was beautiful in the way expensive cages were beautiful. Every door had a guard. Every window was too high to climb from. And on the other side of the connecting wall was Emperor Alexander Hale's private study, close enough that I could sometimes hear the soft scrape of his pen across paper. He had not saved me. He had collected me. That thought stayed with me as servants entered with dinner, fresh clothes, and eyes full of fear. None of them looked directly at me. Of course they did not. In this world, Caleb Whitmore was not a confused writer trapped in silk and silver. He was the stepbrother who had mocked the beloved Ryan, embarrassed weaker servants, spent money like water, and smiled while ruining lives for attention. I had written him that way because I needed a villain who was easy to hate. I had never wondered what it would feel like to wear his face. When one of the young maids set a tray beside me, Her hands shook so badly that tea spilled over the porcelain rim. "Forgive me, my lord," she whispered, going pale. Instinctively, I reached for the napkin to help her, but pain flashed across my wrist. The black letters surfaced again, crawling beneath my skin like living ink. "Maintain character integrity." My breath caught. The maid stared at me, terrified that I would punish her. I realized then that kindness was not simple here. The world had rules, and I had broken too many in one day. So I lifted my chin, forced my voice into Caleb's cold, polished tone, and said, "Leave it. Send someone competent next time." The maid bowed quickly and rushed out. The words tasted awful, but the burning in my wrist faded. I waited until her footsteps disappeared, then wrapped the untouched pastries in a napkin and left them near the service passage with a small note telling her to eat before her shift ended. The ink on the note blurred for a second, then rearranged itself into a sentence I had not written. "The villain is behaving incorrectly." A chill moved through me. On the desk near the window, a blank book suddenly opened by itself. Pages flipped without wind, stopping on a scene that looked like my old manuscript. Chapter 13 was supposed to begin with Ryan crying in the garden while Alexander comforted him. Instead, the words shifted before my eyes. The Emperor did not go to the garden. He stood outside Caleb's door, listening. My pulse jumped. Slowly, I turned toward the wall that separated my room from the study. The scrape of Alexander's pen had stopped. For a long moment, there was only silence, heavy and watchful. Then his voice came through the closed door, calm enough to make my heart stumble. "You insulted that maid loudly enough for the hallway to hear," he said. "But you left food for her where no noble would look." I could not move. I could not answer. The door opened, and Alexander stood there in black shirt sleeves, his golden eyes fixed on me like he had found a crack in a mask. "Tell me, Caleb," he said quietly, "which one is the lie?" I wanted to tell him the truth so badly that it felt like another chain tightening around my throat. The lie was the cruel voice. The lie was Caleb Whitmore, the spoiled noble Omega who snapped at frightened servants and wore arrogance like perfume. The truth was the note by the service passage, the pastries wrapped in a napkin, the shaking hand I had wanted to steady before the story burned my wrist for trying. But Alexander Hale was not a man who could be trusted with half a truth. I had written him to notice everything. His golden eyes moved from my face to my covered wrist, then to the open book on the desk where the words were still rearranging themselves in thin black lines. I stepped in front of it too late. His gaze sharpened. "Move," he said. The command was quiet, almost gentle, and that made it worse. Every Omega instinct in this borrowed body wanted to obey, but the human part of me, the terrified author part, held still. The ink beneath my sleeve flared with cold fire. "Maintain character integrity." So I lifted my chin and gave him the smile Caleb would have given, polished, empty, and sharp around the edges. "Your Majesty spends too much time listening at doors," I said. "It is unbecoming for an emperor." A guard outside inhaled as if he expected the room to freeze. Alexander did not react. He only studied me with that unbearable stillness, the kind that made lies feel like paper held near a flame. "And you spend too much effort pretending not to be afraid," he answered. That sentence hit too close. The book on the desk fluttered behind me, its pages turning faster. A new line formed before I could hide it. "The villain softens. The world corrects." Somewhere beyond the moon tower, a crash rang out from the lower corridor, followed by the sharp sound of running feet. My heart sank. Alexander turned toward the door at once. I knew this scene, but I had changed it. In the original chapter, the maid I had helped was supposed to serve Ryan in the garden, spill tea on his sleeve, and be dismissed from the palace. It was a small cruelty meant to make Ryan look forgiving when he later asked that she be rehired. But because I had sent her food, because I had acted kindly outside the script, the correction had arrived in a different form. The guard opened the door, and another servant stood there breathless, his face pale. "Your Majesty," the young maid from Lord Caleb's hall slipped on the east stairs. "She is frightened, but awake. The physician has been called." Relief came first, then guilt so strong I nearly stumbled. I had not saved her. I had moved the misfortune from one page to another. Alexander looked back at me, and for the first time his expression changed. Not much, only a slight narrowing of his eyes, but I saw the calculation behind it. "You knew something would happen." I shook my head, but the denial felt useless. I suspected. Because of that book, he asked. The air in the room grew colder. I thought of the maid, of the warning burned into my wrist, of the strange law that punished every gentle choice I made. If Alexander kept watching me, he would see too much. If he saw too much, the story might punish him next. So I reached for the only weapon the plot still allowed me to use. I became the villain. I laughed softly, even though my chest hurt. Perhaps I wanted her frightened, I said. Perhaps people learn faster when they are reminded where they stand. The words were awful. They filled the room like smoke. Alexander stepped closer, and the scent of frost and pine wrapped around me until I could barely breathe. No, he said. That was the lie. Before I could answer, he reached out and caught my wrist, not harshly, but firmly enough that the sleeve slipped back. The black letters blazed against my pale skin. For one impossible second, the entire tower went silent. Then the ink changed shape beneath his fingers and formed two words that were never meant for his eyes. Author detected. The two words burned brighter than any candle in the moon tower, and for a moment I forgot how to breathe. Alexander did not release my wrist. His fingers stayed around it, warm through the cold glow of the ink, steady in a way that made panic feel even louder inside my chest. Outside the room, servants moved in distant whispers, guards waited behind the door, and somewhere below us a frightened maid was being cared for because I had tried to change one small sentence in a world that hated being corrected. But inside that room, everything had narrowed to the Emperor, my wrist, and the impossible truth written across my skin. Author detected. Alexander read it once. Then again. His expression did not break, but something behind his golden eyes shifted, something older than suspicion and far more dangerous than anger. Author, he said quietly, as if tasting a word from a dead language. The ink pulsed under his gaze. I tried to pull away, but the letters tightened like a warning. My sleeve slipped lower, exposing more of Caleb Whitmore's pale skin, and a second line appeared beneath the first. Narrative anomaly secured by imperial contact. I stared at it in horror. Secured. The story had named his touch as a restraint, or maybe as protection. I could not tell which possibility frightened me more. Alexander noticed my reaction. Of course he did. I had made him a ruler who could read a room by the direction of a single breath. He lifted his eyes to mine. What did you author, Caleb? The name hurt because it was not mine, and yet it was all anyone in this world had left to call me. I swallowed. The truth pressed against my teeth like glass. Nothing that matters now. His grip became stiller, not tighter, only more certain. That is the answer of a man hiding a disaster. A bitter laugh almost escaped me. He had no idea. He was the disaster and the miracle, the king I had built out of loneliness, discipline, and a lifetime of endings too cold to be called happy. I remembered writing his childhood in a locked northern palace, his first lesson in distrust, his first victory at 16, the way every person who loved him had been taken by distance, duty, or politics until he learned to sit on a throne like it was the only place left where no one could abandon him. I had called it character depth. Standing in front of him now, I wanted to apologize for every sentence. The book on the desk snapped open again. Pages turned so fast they blurred, then stopped on a passage written in black ink. The Emperor does not trust the villain. The Emperor must go to Ryan. The Emperor must return to the correct path. Alexander read it from across the room, and his face went colder. Ryan, he said. The story wants me with him. My silence answered before I could. For the first time, Alexander looked away from me, toward the window where the capital glittered beneath the moon like spilled diamonds. And you know why. I forced myself to speak carefully. Ryan is loved by the court. He is gentle, beautiful, harmless, everything the Empire expects beside you. That is not what I asked. He turned back, and the weight of his attention nearly unmade me. Did you write him for me? The ink on my wrist flashed in warning, but I was too tired to keep lying cleanly. I wrote him for the throne, I whispered. Not for you. The answer changed the air. Alexander studied me as if I had just opened a door inside a locked room. Then his voice dropped, quiet enough that only I could hear it. And what did you write me for? My chest tightened. I saw the loneliness I had given him, the crown I had made too heavy, the love I had kept just out of reach because heartbreak made the plot stronger. To endure, I said. The words came out rough. I wrote you to endure everything. For 1 second, he looked almost human. Not soft, not forgiving, just wounded in a place he would never allow the court to see. Then the ink on my wrist twisted again, forming a sentence that made my blood go cold. Unauthorized emotional divergence detected. Correction initiated. Somewhere beyond the tower, the palace bells began to ring. The palace bells rang 12 times, each note rolling through the moon tower like a warning from the bones of the empire itself. Alexander released my wrist only after the ink faded, but the warmth of his hand remained on my skin, impossible to ignore and impossible to trust. Outside, hurried footsteps filled the corridor. Voices rose, then hushed the instant they neared his door. The world was correcting itself, and I could feel it searching for the weakest place to strike. A guard entered, bowed low, and announced that Lord Ryan Whitmore had collapsed in the Imperial Garden. The words landed exactly where the story wanted them to. Ryan in the garden. Alexander called to his side. The perfect scene trying to rebuild itself around us. I expected Alexander to leave at once. In the original chapter, he would have found Ryan beneath the white roses, trembling beautifully under the moonlight, and that would have been the first true step toward their destined romance. Instead, Alexander looked at me. "You are coming with me," he said. My stomach tightened. That is a terrible idea. Most useful truths are. He took his black cloak from the chair and walked out, giving me no choice but to follow with 2 guards behind us. The corridors of the palace blurred past in silver lamps, painted ceilings, and tall windows reflecting the night. The closer we came to the garden, the colder my wrist became. By the time we reached the white rose courtyard, the black ink had returned, crawling beneath my cuff in frantic, broken lines. Correct path required. Hero event in progress. Ryan lay on a marble bench surrounded by worried nobles, his golden hair spread over his shoulder, his white coat spotless, his expression pale enough to make every witness pity him. He looked like innocence sculpted for a shrine, but his eyes opened the moment he sensed me, and the softness in them vanished so. Quickly I wondered how I had ever written him without seeing the shadow underneath. "Brother," Ryan whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Why did you come? Have you not done enough?" The nobles turned on me in a wave of cold judgment. I felt Caleb's old reputation wrap around my throat. Before I could answer, Ryan's fingers moved to the pendant at his chest, a small silver crown no bigger than a quarter, set with a clear stone that glowed faintly beneath his palm. My breath stopped. I had never put that in the book. Alexander noticed my face. "What is it?" he asked. Ryan smiled, not at him, but at me. "You recognize it, do you not?" He murmured so quietly that only we could hear. "The reader's crown. How strange. I thought only the person outside the story would know that name." The garden tilted beneath me. Ryan was not supposed to know. Ryan was supposed to be the gentle center of the plot, the untouched heart of the empire, the one person every tragedy protected. But the silver crown pulsed, and the pages of my invisible manuscript opened in my mind, revealing lines I had never written. The hero remembers every draft. The hero preserves the ending. Ryan sat up slowly, his public fragility falling away for just one breath. "You should have stayed dead in chapter 12, Caleb," he whispered. "Now the story has to hurt everyone you distract." Alexander stepped between us, his voice calm and lethal without ever rising. "Speak clearly, Lord Ryan." Ryan's expression instantly softened for the court, but his hand tightened over the pendant. "I am afraid of him, Your Majesty," he said. "He is not my brother anymore." The nobles gasped. The bells rang again, though no one had touched them. And on my wrist, the ink wrote one final sentence in jagged black letters. "The author has been identified by the hero." The garden became a courtroom before dawn, because Ryan understood better than anyone that a frightened crowd did not need proof, only a shape to blame. By sunrise, every white rose in the courtyard had been covered with silver ribbons, an old imperial custom for trials involving forbidden magic, and I stood at the center of it all with my hands folded in front of me, trying not to look at Alexander. He was on the raised marble platform beneath the imperial crest, dressed in black, his expression unreadable, but I could feel his attention on me like winter sunlight through glass. The nobles filled the steps in perfect rows. Servants stood at the edges, whispering prayers. Ryan sat to the right in a chair draped with white silk, his face pale, his eyes lowered, the reader's crown hidden beneath his collar, but glowing faintly enough for me to see. He had planned this beautifully. That was the worst part. I had written him to be loved, so every word he spoke arrived already forgiven. The Chancellor read the accusation aloud. Caleb Whitmore, suspected of unnatural influence over the imperial narrative, suspected of deceiving the throne, suspected of bringing instability to the palace. Not poisoning anymore. Not jealousy. Ryan had chosen something larger, something impossible to disprove. He had made me the reason the world felt wrong. The black ink on my wrist moved beneath my sleeve, but this time it did not command me to maintain character. It warned me. If the Emperor rejects the hero, imperial collapse begins. My stomach turned cold. I understood then what Ryan had built. If Alexander defended me too openly, the reader's crown would twist the empire against him. Not with storms or flames, not with anything dramatic enough to name, but with politics, fear, rebellion, and the slow collapse of trust. Alexander could survive enemies. No ruler could survive becoming the villain in his own people's story. Ryan lifted his head, and for one moment his gentle mask cracked just enough for me to see the message in his eyes. Choose yourself, and he falls with you. The Chancellor asked whether I denied the charges. Alexander leaned forward, the smallest movement, but the whole courtyard felt it. I knew he wanted me to speak the truth. I knew he would believe me. That was what made it dangerous. My throat tightened as I looked at the Emperor I had written to endure everything. I thought of his question in the tower. What did you write me for? I had said endurance, but maybe that had been another kind of cruelty. Maybe no one should have to endure being alone just because a writer thought loneliness looked powerful on a throne. So I smiled, not Caleb's cruel smile, but something sadder, quieter mine. I do not deny it, I said. The courtyard erupted in whispers. Alexander went completely still. Ryan's fingers tightened around the hidden pendant. I kept my eyes on the marble at my feet, because if I looked at Alexander, I might lose the courage to finish. I deceived the court. I knew things I should not have known. I acted against the expected order of this world. Each sentence tasted like surrender, but each one pulled the danger farther away from him and back toward me. Lord Ryan is innocent in the eyes of the Empire. His Majesty was misled by my interference. The last line nearly broke me. Alexander stood. Caleb. My name in his voice was not a command this time. It was a wound. I forced myself to meet his gaze. I wrote you to survive. I said softly, too softly for the court, but loud enough for him. So survive without me. The reader's crown flashed white beneath Ryan's collar, satisfied and hungry, and the black ink on my wrist changed into one final sentence. The villain has returned to his proper ending. For a moment after my confession, the courtyard seemed to accept my ending. The nobles whispered with the hungry relief of people who had found a simple answer to a frightening question. The Chancellor lowered his eyes to the parchment as if my future had already been folded neatly into ink. Ryan sat very still, but the small curve at the corner of his mouth told me everything. He believed he had won because I had chosen the role he needed me to play. I had stepped back into the shadow-marked villain, and the story, cruel and satisfied, began closing around me like a book. Then Alexander descended from the imperial platform. He did not rush. He did not shout. He moved with the quiet certainty of a man who had spent his entire life being watched and had never once allowed the world to see him hesitate. Each step made the silver ribbons tremble in the morning air. The Chancellor looked up, startled. Your Majesty, the confession has been entered. Alexander did not stop. Then erase it. The words were calm, but they struck the courtyard harder than any command I had ever heard. The nobles fell silent. Ryan's smile vanished. I stared at Alexander, unable to understand what he was doing until he reached the center of the courtyard and stood beside me instead of above me. That alone felt impossible. The Emperor did not stand with the accused. The Emperor did not lower himself into the story's dirt. But Alexander removed the black cloak from his shoulders and placed it around mine, the heavy fabric settling over me with the scent of frost, pine, and something steady enough to make my knees weaken. Caleb Whitmore is under my personal protection, he said. The reader's crown flashed beneath Ryan's collar, bright and furious. The air tightened. Somewhere in the palace, bells rang once, then stuttered into silence as if the world itself had forgotten the next note. The Chancellor went pale. Your Majesty, ancient law requires a formal bond of imperial responsibility. Without one, The court cannot recognize protection over a charge of unnatural influence. Ryan's eyes sharpened with triumph, because he thought he had found the rule that would stop him. But Alexander only lifted his right hand and drew the imperial signet ring from his finger. It was black silver, carved with the crest of a crown above a wolf, the symbol I had designed in another life because I thought it looked beautiful on a book cover. Now it gleamed in the real morning light as Alexander pressed it into my palm. A gasp moved through the courtyard. The ring was not a decoration. It was authority. It was trust. It was the Empire recognizing that the person holding it could speak beneath the Emperor's name. "Let the court witness," Alexander said. "I grant Lord Caleb Whitmore the protection of the Imperial Seal. Any accusation against him will be brought first to me. Any sentence against him will require my answer. Any hand raised by law, rumor, or fear will meet the throne before it reaches him." The black ink on my wrist flared, struggling to rewrite the moment. The villain cannot receive the Emperor's seal. The villain cannot receive the Emperor's trust. The villain cannot. The words repeated until they blurred, and then, under the warmth of the ring in my hand, the ink cracked into silver. Ryan rose from his chair, his perfect mask gone for one breath too long. "Your Majesty, he is manipulating you." Alexander finally looked at him, and the court saw the same cold truth I had seen in the moon tower. "No," he said. "For the first time since this story began, I am choosing for myself." The reader's crown gave one sharp pulse of light, and every white rose in the courtyard turned toward me as if listening. On my wrist, the silver ink formed a new sentence, one that made the entire world hold its breath. "The Emperor has rejected the assigned ending." The sentence on my wrist shone silver beneath the morning light, and the entire courtyard seemed to forget what it had been built to do. The nobles who had come to watch a villain condemned now stood frozen among the white roses, staring at the imperial ring in my palm as if it were a second sun. The chancellor clutched his parchment, but the ink on it began to run upward instead of down, lifting from the page in thin black threads. Ryan stepped back, one hand pressed over the reader's crown, and for the first time since I had entered this world, he looked truly afraid. Not because Alexander had threatened him. Not because the court had turned against him. He was afraid because the story had listened to someone else. The silver mark on my wrist spread slowly, no longer burning, no longer punishing, but unfolding like moonlight through water. Words appeared across my skin, then vanished into the air above us. The villain was not written to die. He was written to wake the Emperor's heart. A sound moved through the crowd, softer than a gasp and heavier than prayer. Alexander turned toward me, his face still controlled, but his eyes had changed. The cold gold I had once written as untouchable now held something painfully alive. He looked not like a ruler studying an anomaly, but like a man seeing the door of his prison open for the first time. "Is that true?" he asked. I wanted to say no. I wanted to protect him from the weight of being a character, from the knowledge that some lonely stranger had once shaped his losses for a better chapter ending. But lies had brought us here, and I was too tired to keep building cages out of them. "I do not know anymore," I whispered. "I thought I created this world. Now I think I only wrote the version that hurt the least to understand." Ryan laughed once, sharp and bright, and the reader's crown flashed at his throat. "How touching," he said, his perfect voice cracking at the edges. "But the ending still belongs to the reader. They chose me. They always choose me." The crown lifted from his collar as if pulled by invisible strings, glowing with every expectation this world had mistaken for truth. The roses bent toward him. The nobles swayed, uncertain, caught between the beloved hero they remembered and the emperor they feared disappointing. Then Alexander reached for my hand, not to claim me, not to command me, but to steady me in front of them all. "Then let them read this," he said. "I was never saved by perfection. I was saved by the one person brave enough to admit the story was wrong." The reader's crown cracked with a sound like thin ice under morning sun. No one screamed. No one ran. The world simply inhaled. Pages appeared above the courtyard, thousands of them, spinning through the air in black and silver, scenes I had written, scenes I had regretted, scenes that had not happened yet. The old ending dissolved first. The execution at dawn. Ryan beside the throne. Alexander alone behind a crown he never chose. All of it scattered like ash-colored snow. In its place, A blank page floated down between Alexander and me. At the top, in silver ink, one sentence waited. Write a better ending. My fingers closed around the imperial ring. My heart was shaking, but for once the fear did not feel like a chain. It felt like the first step onto an unwritten road. I looked at Alexander, at the emperor I had made endure too much, and he looked back as if he already knew the answer before I found the courage to speak. I cannot promise it will be perfect, I said. His hand tightened gently around mine. Good, he replied. Perfect stories lie. Above us, the blank page opened like a new sky, and for the first time since I woke in this world, no invisible force pushed words into my mouth. The story was waiting, so I began again.